This is the first lecture under Literature 401, Studies in Fiction. The overall objectives of the course include the following: to develop a comprehensive understanding of the elements and the techniques employed in fiction writing, to analyze and interpret various genres of fiction, including novels, short stories, novelettes, and novellas. We are also going to explore the historical and cultural context that shape the creation and reception of fiction. This course also examines the major theories and approaches to the study of fiction. It has to do with how learners, like this, you as my students, can develop advanced critical thinking that will help you in analyzing fictional text. So at the end of it all, the course will help you in communicating perfectly or very well, effectively, interpretations. You will be able to carry out effective interpretations of different texts, particularly when it comes to fiction. Now, let's look at fiction. When we say fiction, we are talking about the genre of literature under prose that embraces imaginative narratives. Unlike, when we look at prose, we can have fictional prose and non-fictional prose. In the case of non-fictional prose, we are talking about stories that are products of reality, of things that have happened to an individual, to a group of people, and so on. So the source of the story of narratives from the perspective of non-fiction is a reality, something that has happened to somebody, sometime, somewhere, sometime in the past. But as far as this course is concerned, our attention is on fiction, which is the opposite of non-fiction. While non-fiction emphasizes reality, fiction emphasizes imagination, creation of unreal characters, unreal events, unreal settings. So under fiction, we are talking about the form of prose that centers on the imaginative work of the author, of the narrator. So the emphasis is on the bringing together of creativity and exploration by the author to form a story. The ability to imagine, the ability to invent, the ability to feign, FEIGN, a story. So the story that makes up a fiction is not a real life story. It is a product of the author's imagination. Now, we are looking at characteristics of fiction. What are the things that make up fiction? As we have mentioned, fiction is a product of imagination, a product of author's creativity, a product of author's capacity to create, to imagine, and bring to something that looks somewhat real into a form of writing, a narrative that originated from the imagination of the author. It's not true. The story is not true. It's not factual, but it has some elements of reality. If somebody is telling a story that he has imagined, his imagination is a product of reality. It's a product of his experience, what he has heard before, what he has read before, what he has gone through before. It is on those on those elements that is going to bring out his own imagination. His imaginative capacity is going to be based on what he has known, what he has seen, what he has heard, only that what he is going to write is not something that has happened somewhere sometime before. It's something that he is being he is bringing together, he is forming, he is cooking up, he is presenting from his own creation, from his own imagination. That's why it's different from non-fiction. When we look at it, it did not just happen like that when to come talk when we talk about fiction. A good number of us grew up in villages where we were gathered by our parents or somebody who was older than us. When we were very young, they will be telling us stories, some books we read about tortoise, about the elephant, about the lion and the hare, all those things being put together, folk tales, stories that uh, people will pass from one generation to another through the word of mouth in order to teach some moral lessons to those who are listening to what is being said. So, generally, fiction came up from origin, from folktales, folklores, stories that were put together by people in old times, and those stories were passed from one generation to another. They were not real stories, though they may have some element of reality. They were put together by those people of old times, and they passed from one generation to another based on what they have imagined, not what has happened. You can imagine when the story is talking about the tortoise climbing into the heavens, the king as the lion as the king of the jungle, inviting all other animals, all those things. We know that they had never happened, but they were brought together. So it's on the basis of stories being told like this that fictional works emanated from. Before the written culture, people had been passing stories from one generation to the other using word of the mouth. So fiction has specific roles it plays in people's culture and when we talk society. That's why fiction is very, very important. We have mentioned previously that most of the stories that were told in those years, in the past years, in the past generations, and passed to the generations following, were meant to teach those who listen to them moral lessons. They were meant to pass values, beliefs, great things about the culture of the people from one generation to the other. Since there was no means of writing, people passed passed their way of life, passed cultural values. They would not want to go with their generation. So other generations using stories, narrations, and to also establish some themes, some issues of life, maybe issue of marriage, issue of love, issue of friendliness, issue of hate, and the rest of them, and individual experiences, what they have seen in life, what they have heard in life, to sustain such things. People engaged themselves in oral literature, and it's from there the written form of fiction came from. So there is a great connection between fiction and the culture of the people, the way the society is brought together. There are key elements and techniques that are very, very important to the writing of fiction. If somebody is interested in writing a fictional work or in analyzing a fictional text, there are elements that we cannot do away from. One of them is the plot. So we talk about about plot, we have done it before when we were in 100 level. We are talking about the sequential arrangement of events in a story. No story will be told haphazardly and still make sense. There are events that have happened in the story or in a story. Those events are expected to be arranged sequentially or in an order that will make understanding of the story easy for the reader. So it may start from the beginning, move to the middle, and from the middle to the end. Or some storytellers may decide to start their story from the middle, then they move back to the middle again and to the end. Some will start from the end and then use flashback to bring the story, the aspect or the part of the story from the beginning to when it is going to be mentioned in the plot. That's why we have different types of plots, like linear plots, where the order is usually in a straightforward manner from the beginning to the middle and then from the middle to the end. Some are cyclical in nature, where a story may start from the end, then move to the beginning, from the beginning to the middle, and back to the end. And in a plot, there are elements that are very important. One of them, some of them include exposition in which the background to the story is established. Something is made known or provided about the characters in the story, especially the protagonist, the setting of the story, and the rest of them. So it is at the beginning of the story, at the exposition level, that the reader is provided with some information that will help him or her understand events that will follow. And after the exposition stage, we have the rising action, where issues, conflicts, challenges begin to unfold, and that continues to the climax, which will be the highest point of conflict, when suspense will have got to the highest level, to the peak, and from there we go to the falling action, where issues are beginning to be resolved, and then we have a solution where the issue or issues that have formed the conflict are finally resolved, and the lesson that is supposed to be learned in the story is actually learned at the domain level. Then we have characterization, where which is used by the author to give roles to different characters in a story, and the characters can be major characters and minor characters. We can have the protagonist and the antagonist. We can have round characters or flat characters, as the case may be. We also have setting as an element of fiction writing or in fiction writing, where we look at the background, the physical aspect of the story, the places mentioned in the story. And how do we know the places mentioned, the setting of the story? We know that physical setting by the names of the characters, the names of the places they, they represent, or where the story takes place. By the time we mention the names, if it is a name that is Yoruba in nature, oh, this is talking about West Africa, Southwest Nigeria. When you talk about maybe something like an Igbo name, one can go to, but all in all, we can say is talking about Nigeria, talking about Africa, because of the names of towns, villages, and the characters in the story. We also have another type of setting, which is time setting, in which we look at the time the story is referred to. And how do you see that? What is the culture? What is the trend in the story? That will tell us the time the story is actually referring to. In a situation where the characters are living uh, high here, they are wearing trousers that are buggy. They are talking about colonial masters. we will know that such a story will be referring to early before 1960 or early 1960 and things like that. So when we are talking about computer, we are talking about social media, we are talking about Facebook, we are talking about AI. We don't need to go far before we know the time of the story. We will not be talking about what happened in the 70s, in the 90s, in the 40s, in the 50s. We will be talking about millennial issues, things in the contemporary, things happening now. So when we talk about setting, we can identify our setting based on physical activities, physical things that could be seen, the places that are mentioned, the names of the character. And we can also look at it from the perspective of time, referring to it might be time of the day, morning, afternoon, evening. It could be a generational thing, maybe something that has to do with some centuries before now. It could be a contemporary issue that is being emphasized in the fictional text. Another element or technique we need to look for in fictional text is point of view. And this is talking about the angle from which the narrator narrates the story. In some cases, the narrator himself is in the story. And that's where we have something like first person narrative technique. The story is being told from the perspective of the author or the writer. The person telling the story is usually the major character in the story. You'll be hearing, we call it first person narrative technique, where we have pronouns like I, pronouns like we, pronouns like me, like us, and so on. We also have omniscient narrative technique or point of view in which the character, the author, the narrator knows every individual, every character in the story, including their inner thought. We call it eye of God narrative technique. That means that the author or the narrator is like God who knows everything about his characters, including what is going on in their mind. If the author can enter into the deepest aspect of the life of each of the characters in the story. That's why it's considered as omniscient. Somebody who knows everything, omniscient narrative technique. And usually the pronouns we use is third person narrative technique. That's where we have pronouns like she, like he, like they. We also have a point of view that is third person narrative technique, but limited in nature. And how does that come to happen? When the narrator picks one of the characters in the story and narrates the story from the person's perspective. He knows the character very well, but not all the characters in the story. Other characters are explained based on what is said about uh, that character that through whom the story is being told. We also have themes. Themes. When we talk about themes, we are talking about central ideas, messages. What are the take homes from the story? After reading the story, what are the issues that are discussed there? So those are some of the elements we look for in fictional text. We have some examples of fictional genres. One of them is novel. Novel is the largest in the range of genres of prose fiction. Usually is between 170, is at least 170 pages. That is, we are talking about 500,000 words or 5,000 words and above. So we are talking about 50,000 word and above. So it's a work of narrative, fictional work of narrative that has at least 50,000 words and at least 170 pages. We have the novella, which is the one that comes after the novel. It has between 17,500 words and 50,000 words. That is between 60 and 170 pages. We have novelette too, which has about 7,500 words and 17,500 words. That's between 25 to 60 pages. We also have short stories, which are usually between 2,000 words and 7,500 words. That is between 5 and 25 pages. These are narratives that could be read in a sitting in a very short time. The reader can pick any of these up and finish reading it in a sitting. You have experimental fiction where the narration challenges traditional storytelling conventions by making use of creativity and narrative structure that will not follow the usual structure we are used to. So in this series of lecture, the first lecture for we have looked at what fiction is. We have looked at different characteristics of fiction. We also review the historical aspect of fiction. We as well look at the elements that make up fiction. We also differentiate between fiction and non-fiction. So we'll continue from where we have stopped in this series in the next lecture. So I want you to go through it again in case you have any issue. By the time you go through the lecture several times, I believe you understand the content better or very well. And then after you are sure you have understood the content, you go through the questions that follow. You are also at liberty to send some questions to me using the platform. By the grace of God, right answers, satisfactory answers will be provided. Till we meet next time, thank you very much for listening.